My name is Lola, and I'm 26 years old. I wouldn't say my life is overly dramatic, but I can't say the same about my brother, Jason. Jason, who's 2 years older than me, has always thrived on making everything a spectacle. Ever since we were kids, his pranks and over-the-top antics have been the center of attention. He loved staging elaborate jokes, claiming they were life lessons meant to make us better people. I've always been the quieter one in the family, more reserved, less inclined to create scenes. Maybe that's why Jason loves targeting me. Take the airport incident, for example. A few weeks ago, Jason flew back home after visiting a friend. I was supposed to pick him up, but my day spiraled out of control. A last-minute project kept me late at work, and my phone died. By the time I realized what had happened, Jason was already home, angry and annoyed. He let me have it. "Do you even care about me?" he asked. "What if something bad had happened? Would you even notice?" I apologized profusely. I even offered to make it up to him, but Jason brushed it off with his trademark flair. "Don't worry, Lola," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "One day, you'll understand what it's like to feel forgotten." That was Jason, dramatic to a fault. At the time, I thought it was just another one of his melodramatic moments. I laughed it off, told him he was overreacting, and moved on. But Jason didn't. Little did I know, that moment would set off a chain of events that would flip my world upside down. What I thought was a sibling spat would soon turn into a nightmare I never could have imagined. It was a Thursday afternoon when my phone rang. I was in the middle of a meeting, but something about the way it buzzed nonstop made my stomach twist. I excused myself and answered, only to hear my mother sobbing on the other end of the line. "Lola, it's Jason," she choked out. He's gone." For a second, I didn't understand. Gone? Gone where? My brain refused to process what she was saying. "There was an accident," she continued. "A car crash. Jason didn't make it." The room felt like it tilted. I clutched the wall, trying to steady myself as her words sank in. My brother, my irritating, over-the-top, larger-than-life brother, was dead. My mom's voice broke through my haze. She told me there would be a small memorial service at the family house in a few days. She wanted me to come right away, to be with them, to help plan. I mumbled something about needing to call work and hung up. The shock was overwhelming. My last interaction with Jason flashed through my mind. His angry face, his pointed words about being forgotten. My heart ached with guilt. I had been so wrapped up in my own life that I'd neglected him, and now he was gone. I sat down, trying to breathe through the crushing weight of it all. My hands shook as I called my boss to explain I needed time off. I couldn't even finish the conversation before I broke down in tears. Jason was gone. Forever. And I wasn't ready to say goodbye. The days leading up to the memorial were a blur of grief and preparation. I threw myself into the details, clinging to the tasks as if staying busy would dull the ache in my chest. I picked out a black dress, simple but respectful. I wrote and rewrote a speech, trying to capture everything Jason had meant to me. It wasn't easy. Jason had always been larger than life, the kind of person who filled every room he walked into. How could I possibly condense that into a few minutes of words? I jotted down anecdotes about his pranks, his charisma, even his annoying habits. I wanted to show everyone the Jason I knew, flawed, infuriating, but deeply loved. Grief is a strange thing. Some moments I felt completely numb, as though the world had turned into a muted, colorless version of itself. Other times, I was hit with sharp waves of emotion, guilt, regret, anger, and an overwhelming sense of loss. What haunted me most was the last thing Jason had said to me. "One day, you'll understand what it's like to feel forgotten." His words replayed in my mind, over and over. Did he know how much that would hurt? Was he really that upset about the airport incident? I pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on practical matters. I called relatives to confirm their attendance. I worked with my parents to finalize the arrangements. My mom seemed to have aged years in just a few days. My dad was quieter than usual, his grief written all over his face. By the morning of the memorial, I felt emotionally drained but ready. I wanted to do this for Jason, to honor him, to show him how much he had mattered, even if it was too late for him to see it. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, I took a deep breath, clutching my handwritten speech tightly. I was determined to hold it together, no matter how hard it would be. Today was about Jason. I stepped into my parents' house, the familiar smell of coffee and baked goods doing little to calm my nerves. The living room was filled with family members and friends, many dressed in black, their faces somber. My chest tightened as I clutched my speech, rehearsing the words in my head. I spotted my mom first. Her eyes were red-rimmed and she gave me a tight hug, whispering, "Thank you for coming, sweetie." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. I scanned the room, feeling the weight of the occasion. The coffee table was cleared, and in its place was a framed picture of Jason, flanked by candles. I swallowed hard, willing myself not to cry. Then, movement caught my eye. I froze. Jason, sitting in the armchair near the window, arms crossed, looking very much alive. My brain couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. For a split second, I thought it must be someone else, or maybe I was hallucinating from the stress. But no, it was him. Jason, alive and smug, with a self-satisfied grin spreading across his face. The room seemed to blur around me as I stared. What is this?" I managed to choke out. Jason stood up, arms wide as if expecting applause. "Surprise!" he said, his voice bright and unapologetic. "Now you know how it feels to lose me." I felt the air leave my lungs. My heart pounded, not from relief, but from anger and disbelief. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I looked around at the others, expecting outrage or confusion, but most of them looked awkward, almost complicit. My mom reached out to touch my arm. We thought it might help you see." I didn't let her finish. "This is a joke? Are you serious?" My voice was shaking, but fury quickly took over. Jason smirked. "Lesson learned, right?" I couldn't hold back anymore. "You're insane," I spat, my voice cutting through the awkward silence. "Absolutely insane." The room fell silent as my words hung in the air. All eyes were on me, but I didn't care. My anger surged, drowning out everything else. "You think this is funny?" I demanded, glaring at Jason. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. "You put me through hell for what? Some sick joke? A lesson?" Jason rolled his eyes, his smug expression unwavering. "Lola, calm down. It's not that big of a deal. Nobody actually got hurt." "Not that big of a deal?" I repeated, my voice rising. I turned to my parents, desperate for someone to back me up. "You went along with this? You let me believe my brother was dead?" My mom looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. "We thought it might help you understand." "Understand what?" I interrupted, my voice sharp. "That Jason's a manipulative narcissist?" Jason let out a scoff. "Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. You've been so wrapped up in your own world lately, Lola. This was the only way to get through to you." I felt like I'd been slapped. "You don't get to decide how I live my life, Jason. You don't get to play God and put me through this just because you were mad I forgot to pick you up from the airport." The room was unbearably tense. Relatives shifted uncomfortably, and a few avoided looking at me altogether. Jason's expression hardened. "You're proving my point right now," he said, crossing his arms. "You can't take a joke." I couldn't take it anymore. "This isn't a joke, Jason. This is psychotic." I turned to the rest of the family. "And you all went along with it? How could you do this to me?" No one answered. The silence was deafening. My chest felt tight, and tears burned at the edges of my eyes. Without another word, I grabbed my bag and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. The last thing I heard was Jason muttering, "Unbelievable." The drive home was a blur. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and my thoughts raced in every direction. I couldn't decide what hurt more, Jason's twisted stunt, or the fact that my parents and family had gone along with it. Once I got home, I locked the door and collapsed onto the couch. The weight of the day hit me all at once. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, but it was mixed with something else, something heavier. Grief. I kept replaying the scene in my head. Jason's smug smile, my mom's sheepish expression, the silence from the rest of the family. How could they not see how cruel it was? How could they justify letting me believe I'd lost my brother? My phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Jason. A text. "Lola, you're being ridiculous. This is exactly why I did this. You're always so self-centered. Maybe now you'll think twice before taking people for granted." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Self-centered? Taking people for granted? I'd spent days grieving, writing a speech about how much he meant to me, and he had the audacity to accuse me of that? I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to. Over the next few days, the texts kept coming. Jason alternated between calling me dramatic and demanding I let it go. My parents chimed in too, insisting that I needed to forgive him for the sake of family harmony. A few relatives even called to say I was overreacting, that Jason's prank was harmless. But it wasn't harmless. It broke something in me, something I wasn't sure could be repaired. For now, I ignored them all. I needed space, and I needed time. But most of all, I needed to figure out if I was truly the one at fault. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between me and my family only grew. I stopped answering calls from Jason, my parents, and even the relatives who had taken it upon themselves to mediate. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened with a mix of anger and exhaustion. I couldn't keep rehashing the same argument. Jason, of course, didn't let up. He was relentless, texting me daily, alternating between guilt-tripping me and lashing out. "You're tearing this family apart," one message read. Another said, "Grow up, Lola. It was just a prank. Stop making me out to be the bad guy." But it wasn't just Jason. My parents were pressuring me to let it go, saying that family was more important than pride. "Jason didn't mean to hurt you," my mom insisted during one of our last phone calls. "You know how he is. He thought he was doing something meaningful." "Meaningful?" I snapped. "Making me believe my brother was dead? That's meaningful to you?" Her silence on the other end of the line said it all. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that no one seemed to see my side. To them, Jason's intentions mattered more than the impact of his actions. They couldn't, or wouldn't, understand how much pain his stunt had caused me. I started withdrawing from family events entirely. Thanksgiving came and went, and for the first time in years, I didn't show up. My mom called, her voice tight with disappointment. "Are you really not coming because of this?" "Yes," I said firmly. "If Jason's there, I'm not." It was a line I never thought I'd draw, but I couldn't face him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Every decision I made seemed to deepen the rift. The more I pulled away, the more they accused me of being dramatic, immature, and unwilling to move on. But I couldn't pretend everything was fine. Jason's prank had fractured our family, and I wasn't sure how, or if, we could ever piece it back together. Late at night, when the house was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, doubt began to creep in. Was I being unreasonable? Had I overreacted? Jason's words replayed in my mind. His accusations of selfishness, his insistence that I couldn't take a joke. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the prank. I hated what he had done, but was I letting my anger cloud my judgment? What if the others were right? What if this was just Jason's misguided way of showing he cared? A part of me felt guilty. My family was fractured, and I was the one holding the pieces apart. I'd always been the peacemaker growing up, the one who smoothed over arguments between Jason and our parents or stepped in to calm things down when tempers flared. Now I was the one causing the tension, refusing to forgive, refusing to move on. But then I'd think about that moment, the gut-wrenching despair I'd felt when I thought Jason was gone, the tears I'd cried, the speech I'd written, the way my heart broke into a million pieces. Those feelings were real, and Jason had orchestrated them. He had watched me suffer and thought it was funny. I tried to imagine the roles reversed. Would I have ever done something like that to him? To anyone? The answer was no. It wasn't just a prank. It was cruel. Still, the guilt lingered. Was I being too rigid, too unforgiving? My parents had raised us to believe family came first, no matter what. Maybe that's why I felt so torn. I couldn't shake the question. Was I really the one who had broken the family? Or was it Jason? The doubt gnawed at me, leaving me awake long after midnight. After weeks of silence, I decided I couldn't avoid the inevitable any longer. The weight of the situation had grown too heavy to carry alone, and the constant texts and calls were chipping away at my resolve. If I was ever going to find peace, I needed answers, and I needed to confront my parents. We met at their house on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The tension in the air was palpable from the moment I walked in. My mom greeted me cautiously, her usual warmth replaced with nervousness. My dad sat at the kitchen table, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. I didn't waste time with small talk. "Why did you go along with Jason's prank?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with hurt. My mom sighed, sitting down across from me. "We didn't know what else to do," she said. "Jason was so upset after the airport incident. He felt like you didn't care about him, and he said this would help you understand how much he means to you." I stared at her, struggling to process her words. "And you thought the best solution was to fake his death? To let me believe he was gone?" She flinched at the sharpness in my voice. "We didn't think it would hurt you so much. We thought—" Her voice trailed off as she looked at my dad for support. He finally spoke, his tone defensive. "Jason can be a bit extreme, but his heart was in the right place. He wanted you to see how important family is." I laughed bitterly. "Important? Do you think what he did made me feel closer to him? All it did was make me question if I can trust any of you." My mom's eyes welled up with tears. "Lola, we're sorry. We just wanted to help." I shook my head, my chest tightening. "You didn't help. You broke something, and I don't know if it can be fixed." For the first time, they didn't have an answer. The silence between us felt heavier than all the words that had come before it. As I sit here reflecting on everything that's happened, I still don't know how to feel. My family insists Jason's intentions were good, but does that excuse what he did? Is it enough to justify the pain he caused? The worst part is the doubt that lingers. Did I overreact? Should I have just laughed it off, like everyone seems to think? Or was my anger justified? It's hard to untangle the mess of emotions. On one hand, I understand that Jason wanted to feel valued. I know I hurt him when I forgot to pick him up, and maybe I could have handled that better. But on the other hand, his lesson went too far. He didn't just inconvenience me, he shattered me. He made me grieve his death. He let me carry that weight for days, all to prove a point. And my parents? I can't wrap my head around their complicity. I keep asking myself if I could have forgiven Jason more easily if they had stood up to him, but they didn't. They enabled him, and now they're asking me to be the bigger person. The family is fractured, and I know they blame me for holding on to this grudge. Part of me wonders if I should give in, if forgiving Jason would make things better. But I also know that pretending to be okay won't erase the damage. So, here I am, laying it all out for you. I've shared my story, every messy, painful detail. Now I need to know, was I wrong? Am I the one who overreacted, or was Jason's prank as cruel as it felt? Should I be the one to fix this, or is it okay to stand my ground? Am I the a-hole?